why mindfulness practices. Mindfulness practices, after all, is the practice of being at ease with what is. So if you look right now, we've got a couple of quotes from our books. Imagine recreating schools and compassionate learning environments. We're going to talk a lot about the urgency of now. We really believe that now is the time to really address so much trauma and suffering that we're all experiencing. And that promise of healing comes through developing this higher consciousness and deeper compassion for those students or clients that we serve. So please sit back and enjoy the experience. We're trying to make this more of an experience and a discussion since it is a book study than anything else. Next, please. Chris is going to start with a heart beaming meditation.
So I'm not sure at this point how familiar you are with mindfulness. We're going to find that out, but I'm going to begin with a meditation. And so what I'd like you to do is put your hands over your heart, left hand over your heart and right hand over the left. Close your eyes if you're comfortable, or you can gaze down at your desk and just breathe long and deep. This will only be a couple minutes. So as you inhale, feel the symmetry, the balance in your body. Straighten your spine. Notice your breath. Breathe deep into your belly, and on the inhale, expand it like a balloon, blowing it up. Sustain the breath. And on the exhale, pull your navel point to your spine and hold your breath out. We'll do that together again one time. Inhale deeply into your belly. Sustain that breath. Exhale, pulling the navel point to the spine. And holding your breath out. Keep breathing long and deep. Now focus on your heart. Feel the warmth of your heart. Then imagine at a distance someone you love. It could be a family member, a friend, or even a pet. Now beam energy from your heart to that person, sending love, sending peace and light. Then imagine that person sending love and heart energy right back to you, right to your heart. And one more time, pick one more person, sending love and heart energy. And then sending it right back to yourself. And one last time, choose someone you don't know, someone in the world who you know needs extra support. Beam heart energy to that person. And then from that person back to you. Then inhale and exhale and open your eyes. So this is something you could practice with your students. You can practice by yourself. And it's something we describe in our book. And there's something about the physiology of putting the hands on the heart that shifts the energy. And you can try this if you like. Just try it without the hands on the heart and see what happens. And then put the hands over your heart and see if there is a difference. So this is our book study. We have 3 sessions. We're starting today. And then about a month from now, 3 to 4 weeks from now, we'll have the second part of the book study and then the third. So we have a question for you to think about. And we will do a follow-up after today's session to find out the best time for the next meeting. But if you have an idea right now, if you like 1 month from now, if Wednesdays at 4 work, please let us know. If you have another preference for a time, we'd like to know that too. So we're going to try our best to accommodate to your needs. Next.
One of the things that we had talked about was really experiencing today's experience. And that's what mindfulness is really about. So when we think about finding joy and how to do that, especially during this time, one of the easiest ways to think about finding joy is how do we let life unfold naturally and just be, right? So I would like you to just take a piece of paper if you have it. If you don't, you can just think about it in your mind, but take time to notice and just look around and really try to awaken your senses. We've got to get out of that autopilot and really think about ways to practice mindfully daily. It's sort of like a bell of mindfulness, right? How do you awaken your senses? So if you look around and either write or think about 5 things you can see, 5 things that you can see. Really take time and notice. And then 4 things that you can touch. Think about 4 things around you that you can touch. Notice. And when you touch them, notice how it feels, the sensations. Next, you might want to close your eyes or cup your ears like this. They call them deer ears. And really listen. 3 things that you can hear. And when you cup your ears like this, it really does emphasize sounds around you. Next, 2 things that you can taste. I always have water nearby, but when you're eating, when you really pay attention to what you're eating, it's such a more richer experience. And then the last thing is 1 thing that you can taste. So smell and taste. I think I said taste first, but so your 5 senses. And the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the reason why we do that is it's just a reminder of our senses and how we can notice and start becoming more mindful in the presence. So the next thing I'd like you to do is just a simple exercise again, is breathe in, as Chris described, and breathe out. And just notice the flow of your breath. That is just one simple way to really feel grounded during the day. Another way is to empty our minds by just sitting still. That's another way we can be mindfully present. We just went through the exercise of paying attention to our five senses. So when you're eating, you should just be eating. As Zen says, when you drink, just drink. When you walk, just walk. Other simple ways to become more mindful. Go outside, get fresh air, surround yourself in nature. It's so healing and it's so surrendering. Practice non-judgment listening, not only to others, but to yourself. Really notice. Practice gratitude. Say thank you often to yourself, to others, to things, to nature, to our world. Thank you for my home. Thank you for my friends. Thank you for my warmth. Thank you for this time together. And be kind to yourself is a mindful reminder. Be kind to yourself. Go easy on yourself. And with gentle practice and time, you will see things get better and better. This is taking ourselves out of autopilot and really learning to just be and being more present. Next, please.
So Michele, before we go on, let's do our polls. So Ingrid, could you go ahead with the first poll? I want to find out a little bit more about who's in the room. So what is your role? Are you a teacher, psychologist, social worker, an administrator, a healthcare provider? Are you with the government agency, a nonprofit, or other?
So now I'm curious to what the other is.
Maybe you can make some notes in the chat box about the other. Okay, and let's go to part 2 then. How familiar are you with mindfulness? Check all that apply. This is a multiple choice. Wonderful to see that we have a good number of people who are using mindfulness daily.
So important, right, Chris?
It is, it is. Okay, so knowing this, we've got a range of knowledge. So we're going to try to cover some basics. However, we will be mindful that some of you have had some experience with this. Thank you. I believe, Ingrid, there is one other poll that we have. Is that right? This relates to some of the questions we asked ahead of time. If you went to base camp or you got the message from me ahead of time, we want to know what's concerning you most right now. And I know this is a hard question because these are all important.
A lot of equal representation across the board.
Right. You know, I spoke with our president of the Center for Educational Improvement in Michigan the other day, and he was telling me in Michigan, there are something like 50,000 students who are missing. Mm-hmm. Just unbelievable. And he says in Detroit, many of the students are on the streets. Mm-hmm. So I know, you know, the suffering takes many forms. It may be family members who have experienced COVID, maybe concerns for for parents who are working and are out there being exposed to COVID more frequently, it may be that they're having trouble, students are having trouble getting access to technology. And we know that there's an increase in homelessness and hunger during this time. Evictions have been up recently. So there are so many things happening and so much concern. It's such an overload for all of us. You know, when Michele and I wrote this book, we thought, gee, there was a lot of violence going on. This is a couple years ago around the world. We were very concerned about all the wars and terrorism and the violence the kids see on TV and in the media and on their computers and domestic abuse. And we said, you know, to stop that, we need to have some really intensive and extensive work done so that we move cultures away from trauma and towards healing. And then COVID came. And then we had all the concerns this past year over equity. The horrible incidences where, in fact, racism was just so blatantly in our face over and over again. But yet at the same time, there were people rallying for support for each other. And that was wonderful to see. But there's so much more that needs to be done. So we know that suffering is here and real. And what we also know, and we'll get to this in a few minutes, is that the brain is really impacted by this trauma. Mm-hmm. And it is really, really hard to focus on learning, on academics, when in the back of your mind is this threat, right? Like, what's going to happen next? Am I safe? So we are so glad you're here and that you're thinking about mindfulness. And we hope that you'll have tools to share more and more with your students and families as well. So next.
So this is the point where Chris and I would like to just have a little bit of discussion, and please feel free if there's a question that you would like to ask during this discussion. Because when we talk about part one, right, Chris, and mindfulness practices, we're really talking about what Chris described, but we were describing 5 years ago, but it's even more true now. And it is the urgency of now and the need to care. We have this constant balance, right, Chris, of trauma and suffering, inconceivable rates and levels, but we have to mitigate it and try to balance it with something in order to stay afloat, in order to stay healthy. And mindfulness was written because it was one of the tools of opportunity we talked about as really making a difference for those that are suffering. And to Chris's point, the importance of not only addressing the trauma, but talking about healing. So when we talk about moving the needle of change, and to your point, Chris, how much academic has lost, when you think of our book and what we were talking about with mindfulness, what are you thinking about right now? Because academics is really the back seat right now. We know that students will catch up. So what about right now? How do we move that needle of change through mindfulness practice towards a better, more healthier environment?
So in the chat boxes, you may have some ideas about things you're doing or perhaps want to try, want to know more about. You can go ahead and enter some ideas as we continue to talk. But, you know, Michele, I'm thinking of the schools we're working with, some of them in New England, some of them in Maryland, some of them elsewhere, where in fact, there are mindful opportunities happening throughout the school day. So some places have mindful moments that start the day. So there may be a group meeting, and it may be a teacher or it may be school-wide, virtually or in person, Well, in person, we have to be a little more careful with school-wide. So it might be different rooms set up with an intercom still, and a mindful moment comes on for the in-person. And it may be a moment of reflection, perhaps a breathing exercise, a guided meditation, or even an opportunity to get up and wiggle and move around a bit, shake and get rid of some of that energy that we have inside of us, and then take a couple deep breaths before students focus on learning. You know, the research is there that those mindful moments, just tiny moments, even 2 to 3 minutes, several times a day, can make a difference. Think about your students and all the eye strain they've had, the computer strain, right? So we really hope they're having chances to get up, stand up, sit down, move around, move their eyes around. You know, and there's some vision exercises, look close, look far away. All of those, rolling your eyes around, can help with eye strain. So I hope you're putting some things into your schedule that allows students to do other things than just stare at the screen. I'm sure most of you are. However, we know that students are spending too much time on the screen for the most part. So we need other experiences for them. And also for us, you know, how many times, Michele, at the end of the day, I'll talk to someone and they've had 5 Zoom meetings during the day and they are zoomed out, you know. And what do we do? How do we handle that?
Well, one of the things, not only the mindful moment for students, but we always, everything we do, we talk about everyone doing so that it's equally beneficial for staff, school leaders, leaders in other positions, and students. So practicing with your students is a very powerful thing, whether it is just deep breaths, as Chris pointed out, but beginning a staff meeting, because most of them are on Zoom now, by doing some kind of meditation so that people can transition, just like we teach students, right, into the situation that they're in, and that they can really calm their minds and be fully present in what's before them. And this constant revolving door of just going, and from one Zoom meeting to the other, we have to really take a step back and think about what it is that we're doing, like Chris said. So just small, you know, little mindfulness strategies or exercises with movement and breath weave through the day can have a big return for sure.
So Michele, if we could talk for a minute too about just awareness, because, you know, I was looking at some of the comments in the chat box, and Arinthia, you had one of them, and part of it involves being aware of the families, not only the students, but the families, being alert to stress and being alert to our own stress. You know, if I'm stressed out, it's going to be more difficult for me to be fully present with my students, to be alert to their needs, because that stress is going to impact how I perceive things and how I interact with my students. I may not be quite as compassionate or quite as understanding if I feel like I have to complete something and get it done because of the time pressure, for example. And on the other end of the screen is a family. They may be stressed out because maybe there's 1 or 2 computers and 3 or 4 kids, or 2 kids and 2 adults that are trying to handle all that, and the bandwidth isn't there, even if the computers are. So what do we do? How do we help families problem solve? How do we have the flexibility to say, you know what, sometime today, you need to complete this exercise. And we help families and children then figure out the best times to do it. We have to have that freedom. And we have to also have the freedom to do things other than just being at the computer. You know, one of the things that's come to mind to me is if we look at this experience, 2020, maybe 2021, right, as this unique experience, opportunity of sorts. I mean, it's a dreadful time, but it's certainly more time for families to be together. So what can we do so that students will come out the other end 2 years from now, or a year from now, and feel like, wow, despite everything, they had a beautiful moment with a parent. Those are the things that will be remembered and will be healing. And again, that starts with that consciousness, that awareness of what's really happening. So with that, I just want to kind of move us forward a little and mention that, you know, a lot of this is discussed in the book, along with what we call the reproducibles. So to help you go through your practice, Solution Tree, our publisher, has an online resource. And so you can go there and there are exercises you can complete, sheets that you might use for yourself or with your students to help you move forward with your practice. Next. So here's chapter 1. What are some examples of mindfulness practices we can use with students, clients, ourselves, or coworkers? Michele, we've talked about some. Do you have some others in mind?
Well, the one thing to address further Arinthia's question is that the mindful practice is not only the exercises itself, it's the way in which we are practicing the practice every day through building our consciousness, slowing down, really stopping and noticing what is happening around us. What are people dealing with? There's a variety of ways to help families to really get a better handle on how families are coping with things, from office hours to having individual check-ins. And I know you can't do that with every student, but really being conscious of, okay, this homework assignment didn't come in, how can I help you, right? What is it that you need? Knowing that the homework assignment isn't the end all. What the end all is what's happening in that family dynamic. And there are so many ways to really practice being present, but we need to really slow down. And I know that some schools are really doing things really well. Perhaps someone could give us an example that they're using that's doing, that's been very, very beneficial at this time.
So Michele, I'm thinking about being a protective factor.
Yes.
And some of the things we know from the ACEs research, one of the things we know is that one protective adult can make a humongous difference in the life of a child. So think about this. If you are a child burdened with trauma and you have one adult that you trust, that you maybe can talk to, or that you can count on just to be there in a consistent way, that can make a huge difference. So part of being a protective factor too is to help add consistency into the lives of a child. And that means some schedule, some predictability, something that students can learn to count on. Starting things at a certain time, making sure perhaps it's a check-in towards the end of the day. Perhaps it's, once a day, an opportunity to team up with a peer online or 3 together maybe, and just talk for a few minutes to chat. Perhaps it's the predictability that assignments are due at the end of the week. Just knowing that that's a schedule, there's a routine there can help.
And actually, what you said, those protective factors from routine to consistency to predictability, those can be also transferable to the home, and you can help the home with that. Those kind of things really help the home function better simultaneously, because the home is now school for so many families alike. And, you know, Chris, one of the things that really strikes me is I've heard from so many educators saying when they stop and they can just tell with the faces of who's before them, but also who's missing, to your point, and really take a different turn and say, right now, we're going to do check-ins. And so they change the course and they're giving that subliminal message, I care. Academics is not the most important thing here. There are kids that have food insecurities, that, like you said, are in homeless situations. The equity piece is not only in equity as far as technology, but it is with health, it is with resources. And so we've got to do a better job, to your point, of building those protective factors that are transferable even through the computer and into the homes that say, I care, I'm here, and I can stop anything at any time to let you know that you are loved.
So,
And that's what we're talking about, that need to care, being mindful of how people are feeling and what they're experiencing. And you can't do that if you are just so focused on getting to the next thing and getting through the next assignment. This is the holistic approach. It is a physical, social, emotional, and mental as well processes that we're dealing with right now. That's the state of the crises. So as we move forward to the next section, which is the journey, right? We can talk more about this, right? And that simple path forward. But I think that we should probably go to the next chapter and just hook it into this conversation.
so let's go to the next slide. But as we do this, I have 2 points I just want to make, or 3 actually. One is, if we have administrators in the group, know that everything we've been talking about are things that will help your staff as well.
Mhm.
So please consider their needs. If we have people who are working with schools, social workers, healthcare providers, you know, that consistency on your part and on the opposite end, the schools being consistent, working together, is going to be important for everyone. And it'll also be a huge help with the students. So if they know that they have a special healthcare provider or social worker, psychologist, counselor who's coming once a week, just knowing that you're coming can make a huge difference. And then the last point has to do with self-care. And and we'll probably get into this more, but it's just, you can model good self-care. You can talk about it. You can ask your students, like, what are they doing? Help them form some self-care practices. Help your teachers and staff form those practices. That is all part of being mindful. Okay, Michele.
Well, and those practices that you speak of, Chris, are so critical to make sure that we can be at our best. We cannot be at our best unless we first take care of ourselves. It's the oxygen mask, right? Who did they tell you when you're traveling with a child to put on the oxygen mask yourself first? And why? Because you can't be helpful to someone else if you're not at your best and receiving the air and oxygen you need. So this journey and this healing along the way, one of the things that we're talking about with self-care and things is knowing when to take time for yourself. And one of the things, like, what is it that anchors us so that we in turn can be anchors of support for our students and our families, right? That's the transferability. So I love the box breathing, because for me, I have so much energy, but so often during the day, I just have to ground myself so that my brain in pain or just going a million miles per hour can just ground. So if you would just take a minute to take a pause, and with box breathing, you can either close your eyes or just gently tilt your eyes down. It's really a count of 4. So you're just going right around the 4 quadrants. You start off and you breathe in through the nose, 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold it for 1, 2, 3, 4. You exhale it fully, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just do one cycle before we go into a small other meditation. So start off with breathing in through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale fully through the mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. And between the deep breath and the elongated breath, inhale and exhale, as well as the counting, really can ground you in your thoughts and calm your body physiologically. It's just a simple strategy of breathing that is really transferable to teaching children and their families. So now, if you would just keep your eyes closed and just gently rest them towards the floor still. And I want you to picture the work community that you're working in now. And while you're picturing this work community, I want you to think, what does it not only look like, but really pay attention to how it makes you feel. When you picture it, does it make you feel warm and supportive and caring? Or perhaps something else? And then if you just hold those thoughts and picture for just a half of a minute without judgment, as if you were an observer from afar, and really pay attention to what you see and what you feel. No judgment, just notice. And now I want you to release, gently release, and watch that picture and those thoughts in your mind disappear as if a puffy white cloud just carried them away softly. And just imagine in your mind it floating away into the bright blue sky. Now create an open slate. Let's reimagine if you could create your own compassionate work community. And just think for 20 seconds, what would it look like? And most importantly, what would it feel like? And if you put your hand on your heart and your feet firmly grounded, you become that much more in tune and in touch. And hold on to that feeling, that heart-centered, compassionate work culture feeling. And when you're ready, either open your eyes or gently look up. You see, heart is what's most important in what we do. And it's those little moments of reminders where we're able to still the body, which is so uncomfortable to so many of us. But with breath and with practice, you can learn. And it's only when you have a quiet mind and a quiet body that you can really respond at your best. And so taking little moments like this to just picture that most wonderful thought and feeling that you can imagine, whether it's a grandchild or a child or a student's success or a client really beginning to heal, and just hold on to those moments. Those moments of goodness can balance the suffering that we experience. Chris, with healing, you are so wonderful about understanding heart and healing. This journey along the way, we decided on the word healing because it just seemed to make the most sense. Can you give some context to why healing is so important?
Sure. You can think about other words such as improving, enhancing, strengthening, making better, and they all imply movement forward. Healing implies first that there's been damage. It's an admission that there's an issue. And then it also is an action. We're not just going to think about making things better. We're going to actively work towards seeing improvement, towards making gains, and towards that deep, rich process that occurs internally. So it's not dealing just at the surface, but it's getting deep into the individual, into our psyches. So that in fact, that's where the healing needs to happen. You know, sometimes we can go through life and we think things are getting better and we can put it on, we can fake it until we make it, you know, but what we want is this deep healing that will really serve us so that in fact we'll be more open and available to experience what we can. Let's go
And you know,
on.
Chris,
Go ahead.
when you're talking about healing, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
What all of us in this place during this time and the work that we do can be catalyst of healing. And when we wrote this book, we really talked about how important it is to be those anchors of support, those protective factors, right? And to help that healing process. It's a conscious shift that we make. And this is what mindfulness is about. When you talk about moving the needle of change, it's talking about opening our heart and leaning in and not just having a sole academic focus. And now, more than ever, as Chris was describing, the importance of true healing. We have all been impacted. Nobody has gone unscathed during COVID. So now, more than ever, we really need to restore relationships and build deep connections so that not only our students or clients, but our coworkers and our homes that are coexisting as school and home and work in so many facets can all get better together through really concentrating on health and wellness. And so that's really what we're talking about in this journey that we were talking about years ago, right, Chris? And that's why we decided on healing, not knowing what was to come. And I feel stronger than ever and hopeful that we'll take this opportunity in this journey to not only heal ourselves, but to help those that are around us, whether at work or within our homes or in our communities, to help them heal as well. And heart-centeredness and mindfulness practice that gives you that holistic awareness and presence is really a tool of opportunity that we can capitalize on.
So Michele, if our group today would like to start posing questions in our chat box as we continue through the next few slides, we will go ahead and try to answer them before we end the session today.
That's a great idea, Chris. Thank you. Because we always get to the end and have to hurry up. So I like that. Thank you.
So next slide. I think we handled the first question some with the meditation you did.
Mhm.
So the next part, look back. Where have you already experienced healing? What were some of those agents? What was the context? And you can either write some information in the chat box, or you may want to have a notebook beside you for this course. Jot a few notes down and reflect on that later.
And Chris, can I just make mention quick? These are mindful reflections at the end of each chapter can be used beyond this book study, right? They were intentionally called mindful reflection so that we could really take a deeper look, not only ourselves, but in smaller groups or larger groups to really think about where we're at and where we want to go.
And if I could just say one thing in my own life, sometimes the healing came from someone who was practically a stranger. I was in a moment of need, and all of a sudden there was compassion. You know, Someone said or did something to help me that was just unexpected. The generosity was so moving. And I can still remember, those instances and how later on in my life I've helped others, partly because I reflect back on those times.
Mhm.
Next slide.
So we're talking about the brain, and chapter 3, please spend some time in chapter 3, because understanding how our brains are in pain is so critical to our health and well-being. And we know that an unhealthy brain or a brain on fire really does lead to disease, illness, and sickness. Disease means not at ease, and it creates a whole host of problems, from anxiety to depression to difficulty focusing and disruptive behaviors. So in the book, we talk about the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive functioning part of the brain where the decision making happens. And we cannot even access that part of our brain. In fact, most students are under so much stress, duress, and trauma at this point that thinking about using that upstairs brain is inconceivable, because the amygdala has taken over, which is the fight, flight, or freeze. But it was used as a defense mechanism, but now it has become part of the wiring of the brain for so many people that live in this constant heightened alert state. And when they're in that state, they're unable to access prefrontal cortex. So understanding how the brain works and how we can settle the amygdala through mindfulness to really calm and quiet our brain so that our bodies also are calm and we physiologically can respond in our best of ways. And Chris, the neuroplasticity part of the brain is the most fascinating, right? With the neuroscience that supports our work, because those habits, because the amygdala has created a new file storage for our brains, that we so quickly react to things that it's become a natural automatic response, such as breathing almost. But neuroplasticity, what we have learned, do you want to talk about that for a moment, Chris, about what we've learned that's so hopeful about the brain and how we can rewire
Michele,
our
I think
thinking?
we're going to need to talk a little more about this next time we get together as well. But a couple points. One is, when you read this chapter and you think about what we say about neuroscience and neuroplasticity, sometimes it'll give you a new way of looking at your students. And instead of thinking, oh, it's so hard to deal with this student, and why can't the student learn? All of a sudden, it's like light bulbs go off for us. And we say, oh, it's really the brain that's being impacted. And the really good news, and this relates to Arinthia's comment about optimism, is there's so much we can do to really help students learn. We can help improve executive functioning, attention, awareness, alertness, memory, by helping students get rid of those feelings of stress. Mindfulness, breathing, movement are all good for that. And uplifting students so that we talk about their interest. We help with a positive mindset. All of those things can lead towards optimism. And I believe our role as teachers, as leaders, is to be a leader. We are to be leaders. And as leaders, optimism plays a key role. We want to be realistic. We want to pay attention to the science, but we also want to look for the good, and we want to help others to be able to recognize the good. All this relates to understanding that what happens in the brain is so critical. And as teachers, as people working with students and families, we can help with the neuroplasticity. Next slide. So, Michele, looking at the time, you want to just take one of these?
Go ahead.
Michele, could you just take one of these, and then we'll cover some of this next time as well?
Well, what you had just said about move and freeze to calm our nervous system, it's a fun, mindful exercise to do at home or in school or even with your coworkers, because we need as adults to be a lot more sillier than we are. Fun creates that optimism that you talk about and those feel good, right? So move and freeze is really just standing up and creating movement, and you can do it to music, or you can use your chimes, and your body, and you get all that excess energy out. And then when you say freeze, then you just notice and you take a breath and you learn what it feels like to be still. So it's a fun way and take on our nervous system, but there are so many other ways to really ground ourselves as well. And I can post these on Campfire, all these different ways that people can incorporate really calming their nervous system.
So next slide. And we had a question in the chat box about agents of healing. And let me just start an answer, and Michele, I'll see if you have more to add. So we talk sometimes about self-agency, which means that you're able to determine for yourself what you want and how you want to proceed. So you could be the agent of your own healing, but you may also find that others are. It could be that someone in your environment is supporting you. The one protective factor could be that agent of healing. And then I also think, Michele, sometimes of those props we have that may help support our healing. It could be aromatherapy, a run in the woods, the deep breath, those other factors that support healing. Is there more?
Right. And well, no, just that each individual person has to find what is most soothing for them. And just also from having a cup of tea and taking your hands and just feeling the warmth of it and taking time to sip. There are so many small and big ways to heal.
Okay. So there's a whole backstory behind what we did or what we're doing with the 5 C's and mindful practices. I'll just say I've spent some time in India. I've been there 5 times. The last time I was an interim principal at a boarding school for, I don't know, it's been a long time ago, 3 or 4 months, 5 months. And I learned a lot. It was a school where yoga, mindfulness practices, meditation were core to the school. And this was back in 2009. And I realized I couldn't bring at that point everything that was happening in that school back to the US. It just wouldn't be accepted. But I could bring the 5 C's. the philosophy behind it. So in our book, you can read through the 5 C's, and we'll talk about it next time. But the core foundational part is this awareness we've been talking about today, becoming more mindful of our breath, of our emotions, of how someone else is feeling, what's happening around us, our environment. All that is key. And it's really hard to get progress without that foundation. And this happens in the context of a community. So just think about that. What can you do to support a community, a sense of belonging, whether you are meeting in person or virtually? So next slide. And this is an aside. It's almost like the bonus. If you want to go to sk.org, and you will get these slides, and you can link when you get the slides, we have an instrument that can help you measure what's happening with your school culture. How compassionate is it? How can it be improved? It was validated on over 800 educators, and you get visual results, and you get information on how to handle recommendations that we give you for professional development, for implementing practices with students in classrooms. Next slide. Okay, so as we go forward, this is the plan. You'll read 3 chapters in between sessions. Join us online every, 4 weeks. If 3 weeks works better, let us know. We plan for 4, but we could do 3. Please implement the practice yourself. Do some journaling so that you can reflect back on what you're learning. And then we have this Basecamp platform where you can problem solve, dialogue, reflect. Next slide. And you know what? I think I've got time. So we're going to go out for a minute and look at Basecamp together. So let me see if I can share my screen.
Wow, Chris, I'm impressed.
Thank you. I've been doing a little of this recently, except it didn't go where I wanted. So you're seeing my screen, but not the screen I want you to see. So oh, not what I need. I'm going to go back out. Ingrid, we're doing this one more time.
Chris,
Okay.
Chris, while you're trying to get in there, I just want to say one closing thought about hope.
Okay.
We talked about healing, and I just, so many of us are staying too full on the anxiety side and the anxious side. But if you just gently start practicing more of mindfulness and weaving it in through the day, you will find a better balance and more optimism and hope. And that's what we really have to do with mindfulness, is not to stuff the awful stuff down below and don't let it surface, but to learn to sit with the good as well as the bad, so that we can find hope in this situation before us. So I am hopeful, because I know that that was one of the questions or comments in the chat box.
So thank you. So do you see my screen that says Heart Mind Community? Michelle, is that there?
Yes.
Good. So there's
Yes.
a message board, and Michelle and I will periodically post messages there for you. There is a campfire for dialogue, and some people have already been using it. There are places where our documents and files that we develop can be shared, a place for to-dos and scheduling, automatic check-ins. It's pretty simple, really is. And you can set it up so that either your responses come into your email, or you can choose to go to the Heart Mind community yourself and check periodically. I like it coming into my email. That way I'm reminded. So that's it. I'm going to stop the share. And let's see, back to next slide. And we're almost done. We are going to go ahead and officially end. And from ending, then we will stay on a few minutes. Michele and I will, in case you have other questions. So let's just wrap up with the next slide. So this is the book. Someone asked about the book, Mindfulness Practices. And you can get it from Solution Tree, the publisher, Amazon, a few other places online. And what's coming up? We have Heart Mind community activities. We have an e-newsletter that comes out the first or the second week of the month. We have a seminar related to the topic for the month. This month, the topic related to equity consciousness. And we have one coming out in a day or two, which Michele is the lead author on, and it has to do with compassionate practices. And in about 3 weeks or so, 4 weeks, Michele and her daughter, Julia, are going to be leading another webinar, a support webinar on compassionate practices and the future. And Michele, do you want to just say a word or two about your daughter?
Well, Julia is a senior at Providence College, and she has been very, very involved with the issue of equity, environmental equity. She's on board of programmers, which she's brought in a variety of speakers to really improve the culture there. She's also the president of the student advisory athletics in the whole at the school. And she's used that platform to really bring about mental health issues. And the motto, "We're more than an athlete," to bring light to a variety of issues. So what we're talking about, heart-centered compassion, equity, all of these important issues are also on the minds of youth. So I'm really excited because she'll have a lot of great things to share from their perspective.
So my very last announcement, thank you. And Julia is amazing. She is on the coordinating committee for this new initiative that we've started. It's the Coalition for the Future of Education. There will be information coming out in the next week or so about this initiative. We ask you to keep your eyes open, your hearts open. I think you're going to find it to be a wonderful journey with this. We're looking towards the future of education and what we can do so that, in fact, we open hearts and minds towards mindfulness, towards student strengths, and towards an education for the future that really is built with a sense of flexibility, looking at student strengths, thinking about curiosity. How do you make learning an adventure? How do we incorporate better self-care for everyone? And anyway, we're excited. We're working with a number of people across the United States right now on this initiative. So thank you for being with us today. If anyone wants to hang around and ask questions, we can open up the mics. Otherwise, we will be sending out information and see you soon. Thank you.
Be well.